Hi everyone, my name is Matt and welcome to my channel. We've had some requests for more High Elves on the channel, so I picked up a box of White Lions. I really liked the way the studio painted the new Lord, and I decided to go with a variation of that color scheme for my models. We also have a set of recipe cards to go along with this video, and you can download them and print them out. Details about how to get them will be down in the description below. We'll paint the models to a battle-ready standard in the first half of the video, and then in the second half we'll take the models further by adding some highlights and extra details. So let's grab our brushes and get started. After assembling the models, I undercoated them with gray primer, followed by a few layers of white primer from my airbrush. It'll be easier to paint the models in a sub-assembly, and I mounted the parts to corks for easier handling. I began by painting the skin with an equal parts mix of Darkoath flesh and contrast medium. If you'd like a variety of skin tones in your army, check out this video here where I show how to paint 9 different tones. Next I base coated the white cloth with a mix of 2 parts contrast medium and 1 part skeleton horde. You may notice this is a different shade from my other High Elf guides. I decided to go with a warmer white for these models, but you could use the other recipe instead if you like. I painted the weapon handle next with full strength skeleton horde. I'd like to paint a couple different shades of white for the lion pelts, to add some extra variety to the regiment. I painted the first with a mix of 4 parts contrast medium and 1 part Stormvermin fur. This is the same mix I used to paint the white on my other High Elves. And for the other lion pelt, I made a mix of 4 parts contrast medium and 1 part Baneblade brown. Next I added a small amount of Seraphim Sepia along the bottom and in the crevices. After the shades dried, I painted a very light dry brush of white. Next I painted the helmet plumes with Magmadroth flame. I'm going to skip the shade for now and move on to the opaque paints next. I base coated the leather inside the lion pelt with Bloodreaver flesh, and after that dried, I painted a second layer for an even finish. Then I base coated the pouches and boots with gray number 2 from my custom grayscale. And you can learn how to mix your own set in this video here. If you don't feel like mixing anything, Eshin Gray is a close match. Next I shaded the boots and brown leather with Basilicanum gray. Contrast paints work great for shading. I like to think of this one as a stronger version of Nuln Oil. Apply it just like you would any other shade paint. I like to use the brush to direct more paint into the recesses, and I'll try to wipe a little paint off the raised edges if I can. I base coated the metal with Iron Hand steel, and after the first layer dried, I painted a second for a bright, even finish. Then I shaded the steel with Gryph-Charger gray. I used the same shade on my other High Elves, and I think it'll help tie these models in with the rest of the army. The blue tone will also be a good complement to all the warm colors on the model. Before painting the next colors, I'd like to add some extra definition to the model. I thinned down some black paint with water and painted a narrow black line around the areas that are going to be brass, gold, and red. This is a technique often called black lining. It can take some time, but I believe that the extra definition is worth it. Next, I base coated the scale mail and a few other details with Runelord brass, leaving a narrow black outline where it meets up against the other colors. After the first layer dried, I painted a second layer for a bright, even finish. Then I base coated a few areas with Mephiston red. You may need to paint a second layer after the first one dries. Remember to leave a narrow black outline where the red trim meets up against the white fabric. Next, I shaded all the brass, red, and orange plumes with Darkoath flesh. Often when painting an army, I like to group colors together and give them a common shade all at once. It can speed up the painting process, and it also helps unify the model. After the shade dried, I went back to the black paint and added a narrow black line around the remaining gold details. Then I painted the gold details with Retributor armor, making sure to leave a narrow black outline. Then I shaded the gold with Seraphim Sepia. At this stage you could assemble the model and call it finished, but I'd like to take it a little further with some highlights and extra details, so let's keep going. If you plan on painting the eyes, I would recommend doing it now before painting the helmets. That way if you make any mistakes, you can cover it up easily when painting the highlights later. If you want to see how to paint the eyes in more detail, check out the skin tone video I linked earlier. I highlighted the white fabric next with glazes of gray number 8 from my custom grayscale. This is a really light gray, almost white. If you don't feel like mixing anything, you could use off-white from Vallejo Game Color. Dilute the paint with a small amount of water, and with barely any paint on your brush, build up some thin layers on the fabric. The paint should dry almost as soon as it leaves the brush, and it shouldn't run or flow anywhere. I also painted a couple glazes on the lion tail. Next, I highlighted the edges of the fabric with pure white. Now is a great time for me to ask you to do those YouTube things that we all love so much. If you're liking the video so far, please give it a like. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any future content. If you really like what I'm doing here and want to support the channel further, please consider Patreon or a YouTube channel membership. We have some perks including a Discord server, printer-friendly PDF files of our new recipe cards, and early access to videos. Moving on to the red next, I highlighted the edges with a sharp line of Wild Rider red. I highlighted the edges of the orange next with Fire Dragon. Next I highlighted the brown leather with Bloodreaver flesh in 2 stages. I began with a soft glaze style highlight. Dilute the paint with a small amount of water and build up a layer or 2, blending towards the edges. Once I was happy with the soft highlight, I grabbed some less diluted paint and added a sharp edge highlight over most of the leather. I highlighted the leather one more time with a sharper edge highlight of Baneblade brown. Next I highlighted the claws and dark gray leather using gray number 2 from my custom gray scale, and if you don't feel like mixing anything, Eshin gray is pretty close. I highlighted the claws one more time with a very sharp line of gray number 6 from my custom gray scale, and if you don't feel like mixing anything, Administratum gray is a close match. Next I highlighted the weapon handle with Bonewhite. I painted some narrow lines running along the length of the handle to look like wood grain. Before I highlight the axe blades, I think they could use some deeper shadows. I diluted black paint with water and built up a few glazes wherever I wanted the shadows. I like alternating the placement of the shadows, and I like to place a dark shadow right next to a bright highlight on the adjoining facet. It's not very realistic, but I think the effect looks striking. The Gryph-Charger gray shade earlier dulled down the middle quite a bit, and it's easy to bring back the shine with a glaze highlight of Iron Hand steel. I diluted the paint with water, and with very little paint on the brush, I built up a couple layers wherever I wanted the metal to shine more. Rather than paint it everywhere, I like to think of the reflectiveness itself as a highlight, so I'm trying to be selective about where I paint it. Next I painted a very narrow edge highlight on all the steel with Stormhost silver. To highlight the brass, I made a mix of equal parts Runelord brass and Stormhost silver. If you don't feel like mixing anything, you could use Canoptic alloy instead. I painted an edge highlight over most of the details, and I decided to lightly dry brush the scale mail. If I was just painting a single model, I might consider painting them individually, because I do think it looks better. But since I have 20 of these to paint, I decided to save time by dry brushing it instead. Next I highlighted the edges of the gold with an equal parts mix of Retributor armor and Stormhost silver. If you don't feel like mixing anything, Liberator gold is a close match. The last details left to paint are the gems, and I started with a base coat of black paint. For the yellow gems, I began with a base coat of toxic yellow, leaving a thin, black outline. After the first layer dried, I painted a second for a bright, even finish. Next I shaded the gem with Iyanden yellow contrast paint, undiluted and straight from the pot. Use the brush to direct the paint towards the top of the gem. That way more paint settles there and creates a deeper shadow. After the first layer dried, I painted a second layer, followed by a third. Once I was happy with the shading on the top of the gem, I highlighted the bottom with a crescent shape of toxic yellow. Then I added a white dot reflection in the top corner. For the teal gems, I began with a base coat of Baharroth blue, leaving a thin black outline. After the first layer dried, I painted a second. You may need a third layer for a bright, even finish. Next I shaded the gem with Aeldari emerald in the same way as the yellow gem. I used the brush to direct more paint towards the top of the gem, and after that dried, I built up 2 more layers until I was happy with the amount of shading. Then I highlighted the bottom of the gem with a crescent shape of Baharroth blue. Finally, I painted a very narrow crescent of white on the bottom, and then added a white dot to the top corner. I used an old brush to apply a generous layer of wood glue to the top of the base. Then I sprinkled on some coarse gravel and fine sand. After the glue dried, I painted the base with a layer of thinned Rhinox hide, followed by a heavy dry brush of Mournfang brown, a light dry brush of Balor brown, and then a very light dry brush of Bonewhite. I painted the rocks with Dawnstone, and then shaded them with a mix of Agrax Earthshade and Nuln Oil. I painted the edge of the base with Mournfang brown, and then I added patches of static grass with superglue. I like to pin sub-assemblies whenever I can, so I drilled holes with a pin vise, and then attached the parts together with superglue. I'd like to give a big shout out to our supporters here on YouTube, and now on Patreon as well. Thank you so much for your support. It really is a huge help. If you want to be like these amazing people and help support what I'm doing here, just click the join button down below or follow the Patreon link in the video description. Thank you. I enjoyed painting a different kind of color scheme on these models, and I think the warm colors will help distinguish these models from the rest of my mostly blue army. What do you think? Can an army have multiple color schemes and still look like a single army? Or is it too much of a distraction? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and until next time, happy painting.